Welcome to Off Hours, a conversation between Jon Edwards and Chris Manning.
Last episode, we were talking about the whitest white paint in the world being developed by scientists, and as I was putting together our show notes, I noticed that turns out Stuart Semple's on this bandwagon now as well. So we talked about Black 3.0 a number of times over the last few years, and Black 2.0 as well. And then, of course, Blink ink last episode that we spoke about, the blackest black ink that you can buy. And it sounds like they've just closed the beta on White 2.0, which is their response to the whitest white paint in the world.
I shouldn't really be surprised that Stuart has gone down this route. He seems to be he's found his niche of what products to produce, and he seems to like taking these colors and producing extreme versions of them. So I know he's done an extreme pink as well. His glow-in-the-dark pigments are actually quite nice. In fact, in some ways, they're much nicer than the ones that are coming out of an unnamed Swiss company that the watch industry uses. So it is interesting to see what he's doing. I don't know who he has working on these projects. I doubt that he's the one who's actually doing all of it. So I don't know who his engineers are who are working on these products, but they seem to be doing a great job of it. And while, as we spoke about in the last episode, I don't really have a lot of need for a super, super white like that, but it is interesting to see exactly what he's doing and to see that that's available, because there clearly is an interest in it. And it's nice that he's producing it and selling it at a price that the average person could afford, as opposed to these ridiculous licensing schemes where nobody outside of a select few can actually use it.
And in the beta, it sounds like they had 3 different variants they were testing out. Yeah. I don't know if that's going to make it out to the final product, that you'll be getting 3 different flavors of the whitest white.
Mm-hmm. Well, you do. Your white is, you've got a little bit of a color shift in your white, so maybe it's a little bit warmer, maybe it's a little bit cooler. We'll see. But
then which of the 3 is the whitest?
That's a good question. The one that reflects the most light. That's the one that's the whitest. But he was saying that this, I think they've estimated it's reflecting something like 99.6% of light, mm-hmm. which is a remarkable amount of light. And I can think of a few times when I've had something that's sitting outside where it would actually benefit from having a white paint like that on it to help keep it cooler and keep it from overheating out in the sun.
Mm-hmm. Maybe painting your roof with White 2.0?
No, the thing for us is that we've got these nice large maple trees that cover our mm-hmm. roof in the summer. So in the summertime, we don't actually get direct sun on the roof for most of the time. And then when we do want heat on the roof, which is in the winter, we actually get direct sun on the roof because all of the leaves have fallen off the trees. So it actually works out quite well for us. Anyone who's out there who wants to get inexpensive air conditioning, I can highly recommend planting some maple trees and waiting 150 years and then building a house underneath it. It works really, really well.
Look, a few of your maples aren't long for this world, though.
No, we actually need to cut down a couple of our maple trees, but they are going to go to a better place. They are going to end up being milled into lumber and turned into a nice woodworking bench for me.
So you've been up to quite a few woodworking projects as of late.
Yeah, I'm trying to get back into doing some woodworking. It's a nice change from some of the watch work. One of the problems I find with the watch work is that working under high magnification like that for any length of time, I do need to take a break from it. So I can't do 8 hours at the bench working under 6-10x magnification on polishing bevels. I need to actually stand up and walk around and let my eyes sort of work at a normal distance again. So I've been doing a little bit of woodworking here and there to try and keep my eyes and my brain sane and keep my body moving a little bit.
The last episode, we talked about photography for quite a bit there. And we did mention Bellows and the use of Bellows just very briefly in there, and how they can benefit macro photography. And you've gone off and bought yourself a Bellows.
Yeah, it was funny. I found a guy. I'll have to look up the site and put it in the show notes. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he's a Scotsman who does a lot of macro photography, and I believe he's actually won a number of awards for his macro photography over the years. And he's a Nikon shooter like I am, and he was talking about the Bellows system that Nikon had developed for many, many years and had for sale for many years, and they stopped producing it in the early 80s. it's funny because they were relatively expensive at the time, and then they stopped making them, and then they became really expensive for a while, and then nobody wanted them anymore, so they became really inexpensive. And so you can find these bellows now used that are in perfect condition. They're probably 40 years old at this point, but they're in absolutely perfect condition, and you can find them for a little over $100 on eBay. So I ended up finding a guy in Japan who had one that was in absolutely perfect condition, didn't have the box, so I saved myself a little bit of money from the collectors who like to have all their boxes and papers with everything. And I ended up getting this set of Nikon bellows. They're really nice. They're really well designed. And I did a little bit of experimentation with it with some still photography. Haven't tried it with the video yet, but it really does do a remarkable job of magnifying your visible area and getting some really, really detailed shots. So the quick shots that I was able to get, I'm actually now able to show the striations, the scratches that are being left from the fine files that I'm working with, which are difficult to see under 1-to-1 magnification, for instance. Like you can't really get that from a 1-to-1 reproduction, which is what most macro lenses are getting you when you're using a standard macro lens on a camera. You're usually getting about a 1-to-1 reproduction, and a lot of these scratches you just can't see under that magnification.
And from the quick demo you gave me of it, it's certainly far more convenient than using a bunch of tubes, which is what I've used to convert some of my lenses into macro lenses in the past. And I think looks like it would also come in handy for doing some focus stacking work.
Yeah, it is ironic that the bellows have become inexpensive enough that they're actually cheaper than finding a good macro tube setup. I was looking at the same sort of pricing. Like I think I'm looking around $140 for the macro tubes set that I was looking at, and this is actually much nicer, and it is more flexible, and it gives you a lot of other options. And then, as you say, it actually has a nice rail on it as well for being able to change the distance that the camera is from the object. So being able to do focus stacking with it is actually quite easy. You're still doing it manually, so that's annoying. At some point or another, we'll see how much of the actual photography I do, stills photography I do for these watches when I eventually start producing marketing material for it. I may actually get one of the powered macro rails that you can get for doing focus stacking, because there are some systems on the market that will actually do. You can program them and do the correct number of steps and divisions. Like you tell it what your depth of field is and how far you want to be able to move it and things like that. And it'll automatically move the camera, stop, trigger the shutter, move the camera, stop, trigger the shutter, and do that for your, 20, 30, 40, 100 shots, whatever it is that you need to get the appropriate depth of image. So I may look into something like that. I think the systems I was looking at were around $500 or $600. So they're not inexpensive, and they are very specific in terms of what they'll do. But I may eventually get one of those if I do find myself doing enough of this macro photography that it's worthwhile.
I never thought myself to be a Bellows person, but after seeing this, I'm actually somewhat tempted. They've always seemed large and clunky in all the ones that I've seen. I've never seen a Bellows this compact, and I could actually see myself using this on my camera setup at some point. I won't be taking the plunge anytime soon because I don't have an immediate use for it. But I think if I have another historically significant piece come across my bench that I want to document, I might very well consider picking up one of these to take for a spin on my rig.
One of the things you'll probably find is most of the bellows you've seen have probably been from medium and large format cameras, and they are considerably larger than the one for the Nikon system. Obviously, these Nikon lenses, they're much smaller. The size of sensor is much smaller. It's working for a 35 millimeter sensor, so you don't need the size of image that you're going to get on a medium and large format camera. So you're probably thinking of the larger ones when you think of a bellows.
Quintessential bellows.
Yeah, exactly. And these are and the other advantage that you get with a lot of the larger medium format ones in particular is that you can also get tilt shift out of it. So you can then not only change the magnification that you're getting out of it, but you can actually change the focal plane, and you can shift that focal plane so that you can get the focal plane on a better angle for the shot that you're trying to get. And that can help reduce the number of photos that you actually need to take in order to get the depth of field that's required as well.
I find most tilt shift photos that I've seen often make large things look like toys.
Well, and that's a situation where you're seeing people taking that tilt shift technology and using it on a larger scale, landscape photography or city photography or something like that, and you do get weird artifacts that come out of it, and you do get sort of that toy look, that toy scene look with a tilt shift when you're looking at, let's say, a city. If you're photographing from the top of a building down to a city, you can get these weird perspective shifts because of it. In the case of tilt shift with a macro shot, you don't get that because you're not dealing with objects that are that far away, and so you don't get quite as much of that distortion.
Yeah, your mind is prepared to see a macro shot, unlike
yes.
having an entire cityscape suddenly look like it was taken as a macro shot.
Yeah. And then on top of the use of it for stills photography, I do want to try experimenting with it with a little bit for the video. And the nice thing is that I've got a couple of options with that. I've got a couple of powered rails that I can use so that I can, like a powered slider, so I can actually slide across the image. Even though I'll have a relatively small depth of field, I'll still be able to slide across the image. You'll be able to see the entire part as that depth of field is sort of moving across the image. So it'll be interesting to see. A little bit of experimentation with it, and it's definitely opens up some possibilities for me. And it was surprisingly inexpensive to get. That was the big thing. I had put off buying something like that for years because I didn't think it was going to be feasible to buy. But when I saw the cost of them and I saw the versatility of them, it was a no-brainer for me.
Mm-hmm. Your approach that you're proposing there for the video work is a clever way to work around the fact that you're not going to have any sort of autofocus that would be able to work in this case. The fact, too, that you're going to be in motion and working as you're trying to capture this video footage, and to try and set up for a still shot with something like this, it takes a lot to dial in your focus absolutely perfectly. So sort of racking your focus in this way and then being able to later pop in and pull out the slice of video that you actually want to use from that racking is a very clever approach.
It does make things a little bit easier, and I've seen this done a number of times in sort of stylistic videos about people working. You'll often see the super shallow depth of field, shots that you get in these artistic videos about some artist doing woodworking or something like that, making wooden canoes or something. And they're not doing it on a macro scale, but they're still using the same technique to be able to highlight very specific parts of a project and be able to show off little chunks of the project in focus. So you do see it pretty regularly in sort of a larger scale, and it can be used very effectively. You don't want to use it too much. You don't want to overuse it, but it can be effective for some of the work that you're doing.
Yeah, it can make for some excellent B-roll.
Absolutely. I wouldn't want to try and do a tutorial like that. I think
please don't.
The depth of field that I'm getting is probably too narrow to be able to get, to be able to do that. I think if I was going to do a tutorial on this, I would probably need to get a decent microscope set up for doing it, because the microscope is going to have a larger depth of field for this kind of work, and probably be a little bit more effective at it. We'll see. I don't really see the need to do that just yet, but we'll see how it works out.
Now, given this is from the 1980s, I imagine it doesn't have a pass-through electronics the way that some tubes do.
No, it doesn't. This is pre-electronics and autofocus. I mean, at this point in Nikon's career, they were still using a screw drive motor to drive the focus on these lenses. So even then, they weren't trying to do any kind of electronic focusing or anything like that, and that's fine. I'm using a lens that has manual focus, manual aperture control, and I don't really need to do anything with that. Although the nice thing with the Bellows is that it does actually have a lever, so you can manually control the aperture if you don't happen to have an aperture ring like I do on it. So that is kind of a nice feature.
That's a nice touch.
Yeah.
That's worth keeping in mind too, because I imagine for anyone who would be considering a Bellows versus tubes for macro photography, I imagine the tubes you were looking at for 140 probably had the electrical pass through for the Nikon.
No, even at that point they didn't.
Oh, really?
No,
okay.
I was, which is surprising. And the reality is that you don't actually want to use the focus on the lens for doing that focus, because it changes the. You often get focus breathing, the way that the image changes as you change focus on a lens. You don't typically notice it with stills photography, but if you use a stills lens in video work and you start racking focus from one point to another, you'll often see the image breathing and changing as you change that focal point. And with macro photography, particularly with something like this where you're dealing with the Bellows, you're typically not using the focus system on the lens, either manually or otherwise. You're actually going to move the entire camera and the entire lens system all backwards and forwards. So that's how you're going to do your focusing. You're not going to do your focusing using the lens system at all.
It's just like using a loop. I'll have to get a Bellows for my loop.
That may be a little uncomfortable.
In the vein of shooting video, you sent me an interesting video about the future of filmmaking and the future of video making recently.
And this was a bit of a follow-up from last year when we were talking about The Mandalorian and the way they shoot The Mandalorian on set. And for those who didn't listen to that episode or don't remember, instead of using a traditional green screen technique where you've got a green screen behind the actors and some of the objects on set, and then you go and digitally remove them from that green screen and put them into a scene, the way The Mandalorian is being shot is they have a curved projection screen behind the actors, and they're actually projecting the world onto that screen. And they've been using a technique where they can then tie the motion of that projection into the motion of the cameras. So as they move the camera, the scene that's behind the actor is completely appropriate, and it really does give you that impression of shooting on a real set. And the advantage of it being that you get the lighting and the reflections and everything off of the sort of the projected scenery onto your real world objects, which is something that you don't get in a green screen. And if you've got something reflective on a character, if you've got a piece of gold or a piece of silver, a piece of steel or whatever, it's not going to reflect the things in the green screen unless you go in and you digitally reflect, you put that into you remove that green from the reflected object and then replace it digitally with something. And probably the most impressive use of this was when they were shooting the Mandalorian ship, because it's actually quite a highly polished ship. And as it was flying through the scenery, because they were using a projected screen around it, they didn't have to worry about all of the reflections that were coming off of the ship. It was just taken care of naturally because it was really reflecting what it was, what the environment that was around it, which was this projected screen. There are a lot of advantages in terms of post-production and also just general overall feel. It feels more real and more natural than a lot of the green screen techniques that people are using, because you don't actually need to go and rotoscope somebody out of the green screen. If you screw that up, it really does look harsh. Fortunately, a lot of those techniques have become really good and automated now, but still, every once in a while you'll see something that is really not well done when it comes to green screen work. And a lot of that disconnect, that sort of uncanny valley, is because they weren't separated properly from the background, or the digital background that was inserted is just not appropriate for the lighting and everything, the way that the person was shot. And that technique, the way that what they were using, the software they were using for that, was actually based on the Unreal game engine that Epic has produced. And they've now produced a version of it for cinematographers, for filmmakers, that you can create your own 3D worlds. And in fact, not only can you create your own 3D worlds, there's a whole ecosystem of objects and environments that people have created, and you can download virtual worlds, virtual scenes, virtual objects, and put them into this Unreal environment, and then use that as part of your cinematography. And you can either use it in the way that they're using it on The Mandalorian, or you can use it as a traditional green screen technique where you can then shoot your normal actors, some of your objects on a traditional green screen stage, and then rotoscope them out, and then get them into this virtual world that has been created in Unreal Engine. And it's all freely available. Some of the scenery and objects are freely available as well. Some of them you have to pay for and license. But it is really remarkable how powerful this free tool is, and the kinds of things that you can now do on a PC, on your regular desktop PC, and render in real time some of these worlds that are just absolutely remarkable and incredibly realistic.
And NVIDIA recently announced a neat tool for being able to very quickly paint fantastical worlds. You just tell it, I'm painting with rocks right now, I'm painting with water, and then it uses machine learning to generate a scene from that, which is really powerful for people doing storyboards and concept art and the like. And to me, this takes that up at a whole nother level.
Takes it to a whole nother level, yeah.
You're working in 3D, and you have a very fine level of control over things when you want to have that really fine level of control.
Mm-hmm.
But if you just want to, like, in broad strokes, drop a mountain in here, some rocks in here, and a lake in there, you can just do that. It was really neat to see just how powerful this tech is. And I can see this sort of thing only getting better down the road. I mean, right now you can make a virtual human and use the true depth camera on an iPhone to animate that character's face that you just made using your own face just by looking at your phone. And, you know, Apple just released a whole bunch of new phones this past week, and they've got cinematic mode. I'm not going to, trigger you over there, Chris.
Please don't.
But I mean, they're clearly pushing, trying to make this a cinematic device. But I think where this could get really powerful is you've got all these sensors in the phone. You've got these 4K cameras in the phone, not just one, but multiple 4K cameras in the phone. And it is entirely feasible that Unreal could use those same sensors, and in the same way that they can leverage the tech in the true depth camera so that you, as a regular human, can animate a face. You could set up a projector in a room somewhere and have that tied into a computer that is set up with Unreal Engine that is talking to the phone, which can tell it exactly where it is in space, and you can basically have a Mandalorian-like film studio in your bedroom.
Oh, absolutely. This is really opening up a world that was, even 2 years ago, 3 years ago, was only available to companies that had massive budgets, whether you're ILM or whether you're or Weta or somebody like that, doing these large productions, these large digital productions of movies. This is all in that realm. The film clip that I sent to you was from the guys at Film Riot, who do a YouTube channel on learning how to make films, professional cinema films. And he was using it. I think Ryan was using it for doing previs on one of his videos. And he built this environment that he knew he was going to be shooting in. And I think he actually built one. He reconstructed a real environment, and he then went off and did things like change the time of day. So he could change the angle of where the sun was. He could change the color temperature of where the sun was. See how it was going to affect the world that he was then going to be going and shooting in. And his previs, his storyboard, like this is basically a super advanced storyboard technique. He was able to then use that to talk to backers of his movie so that he could show them, this is exactly what I want to do, and this is what I'm going to, this is how it's going to look. And instead of just looking at some sketches on a napkin or a piece of paper or an iPad or something like that, he could actually show them a rendered movie that had a lot of the, the people in it. It had the objects in it, all of the things that he wanted to try and do. And it really is remarkable when you see it versus the final product, how well it matches up. Or you can actually use it as the final product if you really want to spend the time and energy to do that. So it really is remarkable what you can do with this. And as you say, tied in with some of the other technology that all of us carry around in our pockets, really the sky's the limit. And you can you could really become, a full-on filmmaker in your basement doing fantastical work that would just be impractical a couple of years ago.
No, it's truly remarkable. And the fact that this is free for anyone to use, it's phenomenal. Yeah.
It's worth checking out this video, even if you have no intention of ever using anything like this, just to see what's going on and how some of these projects that you're seeing out in the world are actually being made, and just how easy it is to do this kind of work. Obviously, for most people, they're never going to play with this stuff, but every once in a while, you see something like this, and you can see using it in some other project. And it was, I've been playing around with 3D modeling for decades now, thanks to the jewelry work that I do, and rendering realistic looking scenes and objects and jewelry and things like that has always been a challenge. And with this game engine, it's all real time. It's all, 100 plus frames a second rendering, and it's crazy how good this stuff is compared to what we had. And again, it's all geared towards gaming PCs, which are using commodity graphics cards and hardware. You don't need to have some crazy expensive, silicon graphics workstation or something like that. This is all designed to work off of your desktop PC or your laptop or something like that.
Yeah, and all this was birthed from Unreal Tournament some 20-odd years ago.
Yes.
But back then, the name seemed really kitschy to me.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, today, this tech truly is unreal.
Yeah.
Like when you see the output from it, the fact that it's rendering it in real time, it's unreal.
Yeah.
It
is pretty amazing.
Absolutely has earned its name.
Yeah. It's funny, I think about a director, somebody like Robert Rodriguez, and his first movie, El Mariachi, he filmed for a few $1,000s. Most of the film stock that he bought, he wasn't actually buying film stock. He was having companies send him sample film stock under the guise of trying to figure out what he wanted to buy for his movie. And so a lot of the shots in El Mariachi are only 30 seconds long or whatever, because they would send him these 10-foot lengths of film. And so he could only film a certain length of scene before he'd have to change out the film that he had, because he couldn't, it wasn't in these longer reels. And, I think he spent something like $16,000 making that film. And I think today about what you could do with $16,000 between things like the Blackmagic cinema cameras that I use here that are very inexpensive but very high quality, things like this Unreal Engine, things like DaVinci Resolve, which are relatively inexpensive and can do, industry level color grading and editing and things like that. All of the tools for doing musical scores and whatnot. It really is amazing what you could do with that same $16,000 today, and the kind of film that you could actually put out and put into the world. And really, if your storytelling is good enough, you could easily best any of the $100 million projects that are out there in terms of what you're producing in terms of final output. There's really no reason why you need to spend $100 million or $250 million to make a movie today. If you want to tell a story and you've got a great idea for telling a story, you can absolutely do that for a trivial amount of money today.
You look at what you can do with Unreal Engine today compared to the Polar Express.
Or even when they put Carrie Fisher into the last Star Wars film, or Tarkin in the previous one, and you see these actors that they've visualized in there, and they just look horrible. They really don't look very good at all. And so it is nice to see these kinds of techniques getting better and better. We are quickly approaching the point where they're crossing through the uncanny valley, and they can actually produce real enough looking digital images digital humans that they can get past that creepy factor that you get from when it's not quite right. So it is pretty amazing, and it's all freely available too.
Mm-hmm. So we'll be seeing you filming from a remote location in one of your future YouTube videos.
Maybe I need to create some weird desert environment or something like that, and I can do all my watch tutorials from some alien world.
You don't have to worry about any of your steel parts rusting on you.
Exactly.
Speaking of remote locations, Swiss Info recently published a video on Kari Voutilainen, and then they took a little tour inside of his atelier there. It is remarkable just how big of an operation Kari Voutilainen has become over the years. I think
atelier may be misrepresenting the location and the building that he has. I think it's an old hotel that he's converted into his studio, and it's on the side of a mountain, and it is absolutely gorgeous. Some of the drone shots they had of the building and the environment, it's a gorgeous location to work in. I would certainly enjoy going to work every day in that, although I imagine if they get snowed in, it's kind of miserable, but it is...
Just ski into work.
Well, depends on whether you live above or below the office. You may be able to ski home. Skiing to work, maybe a little bit of effort. But it really is a gorgeous location that they have there. And it was nice to get a scene inside of the studio. Obviously, I think they brought in their dial making into the same building as their watchmaking now. because I believe for a long time they were actually two separate facilities. So it looks like they may have brought the two of them together because they had all of their engine turning equipment set up in this, and there were some really good shots of their studio where they're doing engine turning work. So that was really nice to see. Unfortunately, they never give quite enough details and show off enough details for me when I'm seeing that. But it was nice to see that, and they're showing off the different watchmaking setups and benches and finishing areas and whatnot. So it was really quite an interesting video, worthwhile seeing if you're curious to see what a nice watchmaking studio from an independent watchmaker looks like. This was definitely the nicest of them. I'm supremely jealous of his studio.
It was very spacious, very well equipped.
Oh, gorgeous light everywhere. It's and again, beautiful views. It really is a remarkable space.
Just a lovely, serene place to work. So we'll be sure to link to that video in the show notes. There's an article that accompanied it as well. And one of the nice things about Swiss Info is you can just freely download it if you want to preserve it for yourself, for posterity. Keep a copy local on your hard disk or throw it up on your Plex server. The other thing I appreciated about it was just the fact that Kari was reiterating what Dufour has lamented, that we've referred to a number of times in the past, that graveyards are full of secrets. That are like every time a watchmaker passes away, you lose a generation, if not generations, worth of knowledge if they have not passed that on and transmuted it to the next generation. And that's something he has thought a lot about and is being very careful to do within his company, is to transmit knowledge and to not hold back any sort of secrets that everyone is there to learn and to get better at the craft. And if they're experimenting on something, they'll work on it all together and come up with what works, and then move on from there and share the knowledge across the entire staff. So it was really encouraging to see that, and to see how many young people are there in the company as well. I almost wish there were a couple older generations of people in the mix as well, so that there'd be more of that cross-generational transmission of information between watchmakers and the guilloche artists and all the different craftspeople that are involved in bringing one of these incredible timepieces from Voutilanin's atelier to life. It
is nice to see. It would be even nicer to see some of these companies starting to produce more content, maybe less slick marketing content and more sort of vlog style content about what's going on in the studio, maybe from individuals. It would be really nice to see some of that and be able to get more of that information just out into the world, either on a YouTube channel or whatnot. There are a few horologists who've started putting more information out more regularly. There's three in particular that have started sort of working semi-together. Ruben Schutz, who we've talked about over the years a couple of times, he's got some good information up on his videos on his YouTube channel. He's actually in the process of setting up a new studio at his new house. So that's been interesting to sort of follow along. Plus, he's talking about some of the watches and whatnot that he's working on. Tommy Jobson, who's out of London, he's a antiquarian horologist who primarily works on clocks, although he does have a lot of experience working on watches as well. And then James Palmer, who used to work for Roger Smith, he's now out on his own and independent and working on making his first Toulouse watch for sale. And again, he's in London and publishing about some of his process. He's actually in the middle of doing a video series on restoring a lean hard straight line engine. So that's been nice to see. And he's going to start learning how to use that as well and incorporate that work into his own jobs. So it's nice seeing some of these guys talking about the work they're doing. Obviously, it's tough to find people who are willing to share that knowledge. It would be nice to see some of these companies put together a little video team that can actually go around the company and sort of talk about little bits and pieces of what's going on and be able to put out more informational videos on how things are being done or what's being done, maybe a little bit more detail rather than just pure marketing. Because I think that for a lot of people buying these independent watchmakers watches, part of what they want to see is they want to know first off, they don't want to know who it is that's working on their watches, but also they want to be able to know the details of what's going on, right? You talk to a car person who's really into their car and they know the details of that car. They know the specs of the car. They know the differences between that particular engine versus another engine. Like there's a reason why they picked that particular car. Same thing with people who are sailors, people who are, who are scuba divers, whatever it is. Watch people are the same way. They want to know the details about why it was made and why that's important. And I think that's a big part of what separates us independent watchmakers from the people who are putting out 1 million watches a year. Yes, the technology that they're using to make those watches in such quantity is interesting, but it's not the same as these people who are handcrafting watches on a small scale. And it would be nice to see more of that information out there, even if it wasn't quite enough for somebody to sit down and look at it and go, okay, now I know how to make all of those parts. Even if it was just enough to be able to say, okay, now I understand the questions that I have to ask to find out how to make those parts. That's often the biggest problem when you're first starting out, is you don't even know the questions to ask yet. And some of that sort of basic information would be, those informational videos would be good for being able to show that off.
Continue to anxiously await the video that is apparently in production at the Timian Alliance.
Mm-hmm.
It's that project started in, I think it was 2006. So it's been 15 years now.
I'm not holding my breath.
But I think I need to stop holding my breath, perhaps.
Yeah.
But,
or maybe we need to get a hold of them and say, give us the footage and we will edit it for you for free.
I'm sure they have a lot of great video and photography that has been captured that is just sitting on a hard drive or a number of hard drives somewhere.
And I understand the challenges of that. One of the reasons why I haven't been putting out as many videos lately as I want is because I'm heads down trying to get these bridges finished and working so that I can get working on the rest of the project, and making the parts and then making videos about the parts and what you're doing. It really does add a significant amount of time to that effort. So I understand why a lot of people don't want to do it. Kari is in a unique position because even though he's an independent watchmaker, he has a large enough organization that he could easily have a small team of 3 or 4 people who could be doing that work. They could have, let's say 2 people who are doing the video work and actually capturing the artists working at their job, and then have sort of 2 people sitting there and editing that content and being able to put it out. So it certainly is possible with an organization his size, which is, he probably has 50 plus people in his organization now based on sort of seeing their setup and what's going on and knowing how they're producing things. So adding a few more people to be able to do that kind of work, it would be worthwhile for them, I think, in a lot of ways. The problem is it's tough to, when you're just looking at it on a balance sheet, it's tough to justify putting that sort of work and effort into doing it when there isn't an immediate return on investment. But I think in the long term, it actually does work well. When I see what the reaction that people get, especially independent watchmakers on places like Instagram, with people who are following along and want to buy their watches, when you see the reactions that they get from the process photos that I've posted on Instagram always get the most attention of anything that I post on there. So it used to be the food photos, and now it's the process photos. So it is nice to see that, and people really are interested in that. And I think there is a value to it. It's not necessarily in direct compensation in terms of how much you can charge or how many you're going to sell, but I think there really is a direct, or there's enough indirect interest that it is worth it.
I think it would certainly engender an even greater affinity to his brand. He has become a brand.
Sure. Yes.
Amongst collectors and people who aren't yet knowledgeable enough or brought into the fold. It would help to bring them in. Because I think teaching is a fantastic form of advertising. It
is. And it's the sort of thing that I don't think somebody like Philippe Dufour can do. He doesn't have the facilities and the resources to be able to do that. It's him and Daniela now working on these projects. They don't have the ability between the two of them to be able to then film and edit and get that information out there. And he's small enough. It's a small enough organization and an operation that it would be difficult for him to add that. But when you look at the Grubel Forzis and the Kari Voutilainens of the world, they're certainly large enough organizations that they could justify doing that and actually putting together a team like that.
Well, Grupo Forzi and Dufour are keystone members of the Time Analyze.
Yes, maybe they're poor examples.
There'll be something someday. But, I don't know. Perhaps the Watches TV is in on it. I think I had caught wind of something there that they were working on in tandem with Grupo Forzi. So perhaps they are behind the production of a film. But I think it's got to be 2018 or something like that now that they said they were working on a film.
Yeah, I think it's tough as well because traditionally a lot of people have thought about that kind of work as being the sort of thing that you put together into a longer feature-length film. But I think we need to stop thinking about it from those terms and
put up bite-sized nibbles.
Yeah, 10 to 15 minute long videos are certainly feasible to do, and they're easier for people to consume, and they're much easier to produce. Trying to produce a 2-hour long documentary on something isn't a trivial task, whereas putting together a 10 or 15 minute long video about a particular process is much easier to do. And I think that's probably more feasible. And then you can also put out something on a more regular basis and consistent basis, and then that gives you the ability to build a following over time. When we see somebody like Chris from ClickSpring and what he was able to do building his channel for years on these little bite-sized bits and pieces that he did over time, and being able to put up a 10 or 15 minute long video about making a particular part of a clock or his Antikythera mechanism, he's able to build up quite a following. And it really is remarkable what a single person can do in that case. This isn't even his full-time job, and he's able to build up that following of people to follow along on YouTube. Somebody like a Kari, or a Grupo Forzi or somebody like that, if they were to put out regular, 5 to 15 minute long content on a weekly basis about this stuff, they would certainly get a following very quickly, and how a lot of people would be interested in what they're doing. Even people who may not be interested in their watches right now, they would be, they may become people who are interested later on.
Yeah, I mean, given the reach of a platform like YouTube, that small team of 3 or 4 people could become another entity unto itself under that Kari Voutilainen umbrella that has developed. Because, I mean, he has the dial manufacturer, he has the case manufacturer now. And they're not just producing for him; they're producing for other company.
Absolutely.
I don't know if it would ever get that far with say a video production crew doing that.
So if I wanted to take my filmmaking and editing skills and work with somebody like a Bradley Taylor here in Canada, that's just impractical because he's on the other side of the continent, and it would be difficult for me to just swing by and film some things. But in an area that's the size of the watchmaking industry in Switzerland, it would be actually feasible to be able to do that kind of thing and have a team who could even go to a couple of different places over a few weeks and film some content. So there is actually if there was enough interest from the companies and they were willing to share enough information, there certainly is a high enough density in that area to be able to do something like that and have a separate company that could actually do the media production work.
Which I think the Watches TV has proven.
Absolutely. Yeah. What Marc-André is doing is remarkable. He puts out some great content. He obviously has some really talented cinematographers and some talented editors, and they get access to great places. And I think that shows that there is enough demand for that kind of work. And if you're really serious about sharing knowledge and getting that information out there, that really is, today YouTube is the best way to do it. It is the second largest search engine on the web, and it is where people go more often than not when they're trying to find something interesting to look at. And certainly people are watching far more of that content than they are traditional television today.
And in this vein, the Naked Watchmaker project, and Peter Speak and Daniela Marin, they'll be releasing a master class series in just a few weeks' time. And we'll see what that brings with it. At the moment, to me, it seems like it is targeted more at the collectors, but given the nature of a lot of the other content that they have put out over the years, I think there will likely be some very interesting stuff in there for watchmakers over time as well. And
they do hint at the fact that they intend to put out more detailed information later on, more detailed videos later on in other series that I think go into more specifics. And I think that'll be based a lot on how this first series does. So if you're already a watchmaker and you're already in the industry doing a lot of this work, I think this first series is probably not appropriate for you. It's probably a little bit too basic, but certainly if you're an avid collector or you're interested in getting more information or getting into this industry, I think this series, based on what I've seen so far, looks like it's going to be worthwhile for that kind of person who is trying to get their feet into it and sort of really learn more of the behind the scenes work that goes into making watches.
An area of watchmaking, or tangential to watchmaking, where the transmission of knowledge seems to be quite strong, as with the OTI, Ornamental Turners International, puts out talks and publications quite frequently. There was an interesting presentation just recently by David Lindo that you pointed me to.
David Lindo has done a lot over the years, probably more than any other person I can think of over the years, to really expand the art and knowledge of ornamental turning, and sort of tangentially bringing along engine turning with it as well, because they are interlinked. You can't really have one without the other. And he's done that through a lot of the talks that he's given. He has been president of OTI over the years, and has helped put together some great symposiums over the years as well. And then on top of that, he's also a maker of tools. You can buy the Lindo Rose engine, or if you're and if you have a deeper interest in ornamental turning and you really want to get into some of the high-end work, you can even go down the road of one of his made lathes.
You'll need some deeper pockets to go with that.
Slightly deeper pockets, yes, exactly. But he's one of the few people now that's actually producing a quality Rose engine that's available for doing this kind of work. And you can either do ornamental turning in wood or plastics or something like that, or you can also use them for doing engine turning as well. And his machines are really quite remarkable for this kind of work. So David really is one of those people who is doing some amazing things to help keep this industry alive and help keep this knowledge alive. And recently, the Society of Ornamental Turners in the UK, they do a monthly talk on Zoom these days, and one of the members typically will give a talk about particular techniques or particular type of work that they're doing. OTI, or last month's SOT meeting, they invited David Lindo along to talk about his made lathe, and a lot of other people got sucked into that as well. A couple of other groups, including the OTI members and the Plumiere Foundation members as well, were invited to that to attend that talk. And one of the nice things about that work is that video is that it's now available on YouTube to watch, so you can see David's talk. He goes through a little bit of the history of the made lathe, how it was created, why it was created, as well as some great photos. His wife Becky has put together some great photos of the lathe, as well as a lot of the add-ons for that lathe, and then also photos of a lot of the pieces that they've been working on and learning how to use the lathe properly, trying to recreate historical pieces that Holtzapfel was working on, as well as new techniques that Holtzapfel hadn't really thought of or imagined at the time. So this presentation is really quite excellent. He does eventually go into more of the experimental stuff with the ornamental turning that they're doing, and his son Christian is also learning a lot of this and sort of experimenting and pushing it as well. So it really is quite an interesting talk. It's around an hour long. It's certainly worthwhile looking at. A lot of the work is not directly related to watchmaking, as you say. However, a lot of the techniques that they're talking about can be directly moved into engine turning, and you could certainly do interesting dial work with some of this. Yeah, you could do some really interesting things with ornamental turning and watch cases. Chris Plouffe, who we've talked about a few times, he actually does some really interesting work where he uses his ornamental engine his Rose engine to actually cut and ornament jeweler's wax, which he then has cast into silver. So, for instance, he's done shaving handles, razor handles out of cast work that he's ornamentally turned. He's even done buttons and things like that as well. So he's done quite a large amount of work with converting that ornamental turning into working with metals. And it wouldn't be difficult to take some of that and turn it into something like casework, especially with the ability to cast into stainless steel through tech form like what I'm doing. It wouldn't be difficult to actually machine this in wax and then send it off to tech form, have it cast in stainless steel, and away you go. You've now got yourself a really interesting and unique case that is impossible to make any other way. So if you like the engine turning world, this is again tangential to it, and it really is fascinating what they've been doing with it. And in some of these cases, you can also cut straight into the metal as well, because you've got a lot of cases you're using today carbide tooling. So 100 years ago, if you were using low carbon steel tooling or medium carbon steel tooling, you wouldn't necessarily be able to do a lot of good work in metals. You wouldn't be able to get the surface speed up fast enough to get good cuts out of it, or they would just dull too quickly or whatever. But with today's modern carbide, you can easily cut straight into a lot of these metals, whether it's stainless steel or silver or gold or whatever. And so you could actually do some really fascinating work with it.
One thing he did speak about a fair bit with the tooling side of thing was fixed tooling, which is not something I have ever done. Have you done any fixed tooling work?
I have done a little bit of it. I was fortunate a few years ago, thanks to Air Canada, I ended up spending an extra day in Los Angeles a few years ago. I was at the LA Pen Show, and when they had booked me on my return flight, what they had failed to mention was that they had booked me on a return flight on March 15th instead of February 15th. And so they wanted me to stay in LA for a month. And, I like LA, especially February, March. It's nice to be in LA versus Ottawa, much nicer environment. But I couldn't really justify spending a month in LA. I certainly couldn't afford it. So I was sort of stranded in LA because they booked me on a return flight later that night. But I had sort of a day to spend in the city. And fortunately, Al Collins, who's a friend through the OTI, he is located in LA. In fact, he's not very far from LAX. And he was generous enough to come and rescue me from the airport. And I was able to spend a day in his shop. And I have to say, there are few people in the world who are better at fixed tool work than Al Collins is. He really does some unbelievable work. I've got a couple of his pieces in my collection, and he just does stunning work. I absolutely love his stuff. And so with fixed tooling, it's interesting because you're using a fixed blade, often one that's shaped in a particular curve, and you're scraping along the surface. And so you're taking a very, very fine shaving. It's almost like using a plane blade, like a hand plane for woodworking, or a hand scraper, like a cabinet scraper in woodworking, where you're taking a very, very fine shaving from the wood. And in combination with the rose engine and the rocking motion of the rose engine, you're able to get some very, very pronounced shapes off of this, off of this cutter, and some really remarkable work that you just can't get any other way. You can't use a spinning cutter to get this kind of work, these shapes and whatnot. And the nice thing about the way, so he was also one of the people that was involved in the development of the Maid lathe. And one of the reasons that he wanted to develop it was to add some features that he was looking for. And one of the things that you want to do when you're using fixed tooling is you want to very slowly move the tool into the part as it's rotating. So the part is rotating at a slow speed, unlike on a traditional plane lathe where you've got the part turning at high speed and you're putting a fixed cutter against it. In this, you want it turning at a very slow speed, and you want to advance the cutter by a very small amount, let's say a 10,000th of an inch every rotation. So you're very, very, very fine shavings as you're going in. And he wanted a mechanism so that it would automatically advance every rotation into a very small amount. And then he runs the system off of a smooth DC motor so that it just sits there and runs for hours at a time. And in fact, even once it has finished going to the maximum depth that it's going to go to, he lets it run for an hour after that, just so that it will sit there and it'll polish and burnish the wood afterwards. So you don't need to sand it. You don't need to do anything with it. He'll apply a finish to it, like a polish to it afterwards, but you don't need to do any sanding or anything like that afterwards. And you get this beautiful, beautiful finish off of a nice hardwood, something like an African blackwood. You can get amazing finishes off of it. And this is a traditional technique that's been used in ornamental turning for hundreds and hundreds of years. If you look at something like the Coburg ivories, they're in one of the Medici palaces in Florence. I can't remember exactly which one, but they're absolutely remarkable. They were a combination of drill work and fixed tooling, where they were scraping the sides of these boxes to make just incredible, fantastical pieces. They were using ivory for their pieces, but of course that's just not possible anymore. So there are faux ivories that you can purchase, which are various types of plastics and resins and whatnot that they give you a pretty reasonable alternative to it. Some people are using boxwood if they have available large enough pieces of it, and again, things like African blackwood. You can Mopani. You can get some amazing woods and just remarkable look out of these, out of this fixed fixed tooling work. So it is different than what a lot of people think of as turning, but it is pretty amazing stuff.
So were you able to walk away with a finished product in your time there with Al, or you just had a chance to dabble?
I have a box that's about a third done that I started working on. I actually need to do some work on it. So it's the body of a box that I turned and ornamented the outside of it. I need to actually drill out the inside of it and apply some finish to the inside of it as well, and then make a little lid for it. So I was thinking about putting a little silver domed engine turned lid on it, maybe enamel it as well. So I do need to still do some work on that, but it's sitting in the cabinet over here, and it is kind of nice to be able to do that, that kind of work with somebody who really is a master of what he's doing. We'll make sure to put a link to Al's Instagram account in the show notes. He doesn't post often, but when he does, he'll often post 5 or 6 different posts with a bunch of process photos and of the work that he's doing, and it really is remarkable work.
Thanks for listening to Off Hours. You can find detailed show notes at offhours.show. If you'd like to keep up to date with the show, follow us on Twitter @offhours. Jon can be found on Twitter @UnderTheLoop, and Chris can be found on Twitter and Instagram @silver_hand.